Everyone tells you the FD2 Civic Type R was Honda's masterpiece. A sedan, naturally aspirated, no turbo, no all-wheel drive, never even sold in America, in an era when the entire industry was chasing forced induction and brute horsepower. Honda built a car that should have been a joke. It wasn't. It was a scalpel. To understand why the FD2 exists, you have to go back to 2001 to a hot hatch called the EP3, front-wheel drive, high-revving K20A engine, red Recaro seats, the whole recipe. It was a proper Type R, small, light, screaming to 8,000 revolutions per minute. Alongside it sat the DC5, the Integra Type R, Honda's other JDM darling of the early 2000s, quietly setting the bar for chassis rigidity that everything after it would be measured against. In Japan, the EP3 should have had an easy successor. Just build a better hatchback. Faster, lighter, sharper, simple. Except Honda didn't do simple. In 2007, the 8th generation Civic arrived, and Honda made a decision that still confuses people today. They split the car in two. The rest of the world got a hatchback, the FN2. Japan got a sedan, the FD2, a sedan, for the flagship Type R. On paper, that sounds like a downgrade. Sedans are for dads. Sedans are for driving instructors. Sedans are not traditionally for lapping a circuit until your neck hurts. In practice, this particular sedan was the opposite of everything that word usually implies. The FN2 was fine, genuinely fun, genuinely quick, the version most of the world actually got to drive. But underneath the shared badge, Honda quietly cut corners. Torsion beam rear suspension, the same simple setup you'd find on a base model Civic. A dashboard borrowed straight from the standard car. A detuned engine making around 200 horsepower, tuned as much for European emissions rules as for lap times. The FD2 got none of those compromises. Independent rear suspension instead of a cheap beam axle. A chassis Honda claimed was 50% more rigid than the old pre-facelift Integra Type R that came before it, and a full 25% stiffer than even the facelifted version. Aluminum panels bonded with adhesive instead of welded because welding adds weight, and Honda wasn't interested in carrying extra grams to a fistfight. Here's the part that should sound insane. The Japanese engineers weren't handed a smaller, lighter hatchback to build their masterpiece around. They were handed the bigger, heavier sedan, one that grew its wheelbase from 101 inches on the old EP3 to over 106 inches. More metal, more length, more mass to fight against. And they still made it the sharper, more serious machine. Why? Because in Japan, the sedan wasn't the compromise. It was the domestic market's preferred shape, and Honda's home team simply refused to let their car be the lesser Type R just because it had a trunk welded onto the back of it. Under the hood sat a reworked version of the K20A, and Honda didn't just carry it over from the old cars. They tightened the compression ratio up to 11.7 to 1. New short intake manifold, a wider 64mm throttle body, reshaped intake and exhaust ports, reinforced connecting rods so the bottom end could survive what was coming. And what was coming was a VTEC crossover point pulled earlier, down to 5,800 revolutions per minute instead of the previous 6,000, because apparently even a few hundred RPM of restraint felt like too much restraint. Peak power landed at 225 horsepower, arriving at a genuinely unhinged 8,000 revolutions per minute, with the red line sitting even further out at 8,600. For comparison, most performance sedans of that era, with this little displacement, were still finding their peak power somewhere in the low 6,000s and calling it a day. Honda looked at that convention and decided it was somebody else's problem. There was no turbo lag to manage because there was no turbo. There was no boost curve to tune around, no wastegate chatter, no lag off the line to apologize for, just a 2-liter 4-cylinder that demanded you actually rev it to unlock what it had and rewarded you violently when you did. Journalists who drove it back in 2007 kept reaching for the same word, alive. Not fast in a straight line, particularly by modern standards. alive in the way it responded to every input, every throttle blip, every downshift, like the car was having an argument with you and expected you to keep up. That's a hard thing to put on a spec sheet, and it's exactly why the spec sheet never really told the whole story. 0 to 60 in 6 seconds, a quarter mile in 14.4, a curb weight of just under 2,800 pounds, which for a four-door sedan with a full interior, air conditioning, and back seats that could actually fit adults is almost embarrassingly light. None of those numbers were class-leading in 2007. That was never really the point. The point was how it got there. Every gear change mattered. Every corner rewarded commitment instead of just grip. This wasn't a car built to win a spec sheet argument against a Porsche or a Subaru. It was built to be the most honest, most demanding front-wheel drive experience Honda knew how to make. Full stop. Honda even let Mugen loose on it, building a limited run with a reworked ECU, exhaust, and camshafts that pushed output up to 240 horsepower, along with a wilder concept car dubbed the Type R that flirted with a bored-out 2.2-liter version of the same engine. None of it was strictly necessary. All of it proved the same point. This platform had more to give, and Honda's own performance arm couldn't resist finding out how much. And Honda knew they'd built something worth protecting, because they never really let it leave the country. Officially, the only market outside Japan to get the FD2 was Malaysia, launched in August of 2007. The very first time a JDM-only Type R had ever been sold abroad at all. Everywhere else, if you wanted one, you needed a broker, a shipping container, and a fair bit of patience. Honda didn't stop at selling it. In 2008, Mugen built a one-make race series around it, the Honda Exciting Cup, using the FD2's own stock K20A as the spec engine. Same block, same rev range, same relentless demand to hold the throttle open longer than felt reasonable. Owners could option their own street cars with the same brake package, the same wheels, the same Recaro rail hardware the race cars used, blurring the line between the thing you drove to work and the thing you took to a track day until there basically wasn't one. Most manufacturers build a halo car and then build a separate, sanitized race program to go with it, two different products wearing the same badge for marketing purposes. Honda just used the actual car. If you wanted to know what a stock FD2 could do against another stock FD2 with nothing but driver skill separating them, Honda handed you an entire race series to find out. It launched at just over 3.7 million yen, around $25,000 at the time, roughly what you'd pay for a mid-trim family sedan with none of the drama. Today, clean examples are pushing $50,000, sometimes more for what is, strictly speaking, a 15-year-old Honda Civic. That's the part that tells you everything. Cars don't appreciate because of horsepower figures sitting in a forum post somewhere. They appreciate because they made someone feel something no spreadsheet could capture. The FD2 didn't have to be a sedan. It didn't have to skip turbocharging while the rest of the industry moved on. It didn't have to stay locked inside Japan's borders like some kind of automotive state secret, only trickling footing out through gray importers and patient collectors years later. It did all three anyway, and it became one of the most respected Hondas ever built, specifically because of it, not in spite of it. By 2011, production ended. When the next Civic Type R finally showed up in 2015, it wore a turbocharger, because the era of squeezing everything out of raw displacement and high RPM was quietly coming to a close across the entire industry. Emissions rules, efficiency targets. The math simply stopped favoring engines that made their peak power near the red line instead of somewhere boosted and civilized, which makes the FD2 something closer to a full stop than a chapter. The final Japanese Type R, built around the old philosophy. Rev it, don't boost it. Sharpen it, don't soften it. Keep it home, don't chase every market just because you can. It wasn't the fastest car Honda ever made. It wasn't even the most powerful Civic Type R that would eventually exist. But it might be the most uncompromising one. A car built by a team that had every excuse to cut a corner, hand off the sedan as an afterthought, and simply refused to take a single one of those excuses. That's the whole story of the FD2, really. Not a spec sheet, not a lap time, Just a group of engineers in Japan who were handed a sedan and decided that wasn't a limitation at all. It was just the shape their masterpiece happened to come in. And maybe that's why, almost 2 decades later, people are still hunting down import brokers and clearing out savings accounts for a car. Honda never even bothered marketing outside its home country. Not because it was the fastest thing on sale in 2007, because somewhere in Japan, a small team of engineers were handed every excuse in the world to phone it in, and instead built the one Type R that still refuses to apologize for what it isn't. We called it a scalpel back at the start of this. Most cars in this segment are still blunt instruments, more horsepower thrown at the problem until something sticks. The FD2 never needed that. It just needed you to rev it. Thanks for watching. If you want the DC5 story we teased earlier, let me know down in the comments, and I'll get started on it. See you in the next one.